So I've pretty much been a hardcore Spotify user for the past 10 years, but a lot has changed recently, and what was the best is not necessarily the best anymore. For example, Apple Music now has a hidden karaoke feature that mutes the vocals and shows the lyrics. Spotify generates playlists to blend your taste with a friend. Apple Music lets you upload your own music and play those files anywhere. Spotify has podcasts and audiobooks, and people say Apple Music sounds better, but I think with two simple settings, Spotify could sound just as good. The differences go on and on. So in the past month, I switched from Spotify to Apple Music to dig deep into the differences and figure out which one is actually the best. And at the end of this video, I will have a definitive answer on which one I will continue using. So, Spotify versus Apple Music. While I care a lot about music discovery, music quality, app features, those are all really big concerns, but I think we first need to talk about the plans and the pricing. And a little side note here, one, this video is not sponsored, and two, every time I show two phones, I'm gonna switch Android and iOS because both apps work on both devices, but I'm always going to have Spotify on the right side for this video, and I will always have Apple Music on the left side for this video. So, pricing. Spotify has a free version. Apple Music does not. There are a ton of ads in there. You're limited, like you can't download things, you can't control other devices. There's so many limits, but still, having a free tier is a benefit for Spotify. But aside from the free tier, in pretty much every other tier, Apple Music is going to be cheaper. Individual plans are $13 on Spotify, $11 for Apple. Monthly plans for students are $7 on Spotify, $6 for Apple. There's a duo and a family plan, again, more expensive on Spotify than Apple. Generally, you're gonna pay an extra couple dollars per month. Spotify sometimes has some bundles with like Disney Plus or Hulu. It depends on, when you subscribed, but Apple Music takes that to the next level. They have what's called Apple One, which for an individual gives you 50 gigabytes of iCloud, gives you Apple TV, Apple Music, Apple Arcade, and it does all that for $20 a month. And it scales up for families, 200 gigabytes, and you get 5 additional family members at $26 per month. Or they even have a Premier plan, which is for a whole family and gives you 2 terabytes plus everything I mentioned, along with Apple Fitness Plus and News Plus. So the bundles are a huge strength for Apple. Aside from the free tier, Apple is the cheapest across the board, mainly because they have a massive profitable ecosystem and do not necessarily need to make as much money just on the music app. But I think you'll see hints of that throughout this video. Apple is a big ecosystem, and Spotify just does this one app. So when I first made the switch to get started, I wanted to make sure Apple had the best chance possible. So I wanted them to suggest the right songs, and I went into settings, tapped on song shift, and copied all of my albums and playlists from Spotify. It wasn't hard to do, it took a couple minutes, and realistically, you can transfer from Apple Music to Spotify or the other way around fairly easily with one of these tools. And that brings us into probably the first real chapter when comparing the two of them, which is going to be playlists and discovery. So playlists and discovery, starting off with songs that you know and you want to find, they both have a search feature. And with these, you can look up the songs, you can look up the albums, the artists, you can even look up the lyrics. So for example, if you just say "The Answer, My Friend," it knows you're talking about the song "Blowin' in the Wind," and it shows you, different artists as well as playlists and stuff like that. The search results, you'll notice, are going to be quite different on these because Apple Music is almost exclusively music, whereas I'll talk about this later, but Spotify has podcasts and a lot of other things in there. They both have over 100 million songs. I didn't count them, but they have a lot of songs. And when I look up music on both of them, you might find differences in live albums being on one or not the other, but it seems to be a pretty even trade-off, and it doesn't seem like either platform has more music that I'm looking for. So if I search for an artist, as I'm typing, it pops up. You can see that below. And on Spotify, they're gonna show me the band that they think I'm looking for, and then a lot of albums from them, so it's a little bit quicker to get into that. If I hit enter on the search, it'll again show you, a lot of the same stuff, as well as some playlists that they recommend that feature the band you're looking at. So a really wide variety of what you could really be getting here. But you also have the option to toggle between what specifically you're looking for. Are you looking for artists? Are you looking for playlists, profiles, all that stuff across the top? You can select exactly what you're looking for. It's a little bit clunky, but it, in my opinion, does a really good job on Spotify. On Apple Music, as you type it in, they show anything that starts with Goose, like Goosebumps, for example, is a song. And so that could make a lot of sense, but if I hit search on just Goose, they do a really similar thing to what Spotify did, where across the top, you can say, all right, I'm looking for songs or playlists or radio episodes and things like that. And you can scroll down and they've got Goose Essentials, and they've got different bands that are also named Goose. You can find all of that right here. The search results are fairly similar in both of them. That's a big thumbs up. you can add anything to your playlist. On Apple Music, I can add the entire album by tapping on the top right to a playlist, or I can play it next. Same thing on Spotify. You can add it to your library. You can play it next. You can download to this device or other devices as well. And of course, you could, start a jam. There's a lot of other things I'll talk about in a second that Spotify does as far as the social aspect. That's why there's more things there. But you can see the UI looks fairly similar, although, more color on Apple Music there. I kind of like the way Apple has that set up to match the background. We can add things to liked songs, so any songs that you're going through on a radio station, if you enjoy it, you can just add it to your liked songs. You can add it to playlists. But there's a lot of social stuff on Spotify as well, as I mentioned. There's an entire chapter of this video just talking about social, so we'll get to that later. But we also have suggested songs for making playlists. So in a playlist then, if you scroll down to the bottom, this is like the biggest playlist I have, just a bunch of old classic rock stuff I used to listen to. At the very bottom, they have suggested songs, and they both do this. Although right now, it seems like they're generally doing a pretty decent job. I almost always find Spotify does a better job of having more relevant music based on that playlist, whereas Apple's algorithm seems to struggle a little bit. Like some of these songs do make sense. Billy Strings doesn't really make sense here for a classic rock style playlist, but I do listen to a lot of Billy Strings, so I think that makes sense why they're recommending it. It just isn't necessarily as hyper relevant, and I think Spotify's algorithm does shine with that. Spotify also has an AI DJ. So if back in the beginning, if you just tap on the little blue square with the green circle, it brings you into your DJ X, and mixed feelings on this. One, it kind of just plays the same songs every time. It's like, hey, I'm going to play what you've been listening to recently, which is the last thing it played last time you started it. And so if I'm lazy and I just want to drive somewhere, I'll do that. But this has gotten a lot better where you can tap on the little DJ guy in the corner and you can tell it, what you're actually looking for. You could say, hey, I'm looking for more of a vibe of road trip in the evening in the summer with a lot of Wilco type stuff. And it'll do that. And it does a really good job of that. It's something that Apple hasn't really implemented the AI to that level yet. Spotify also has, of course, release radar. In fact, let's go over to search. I'll go down to, made for you. And then in here, all of this is very impressive stuff. Of course, the DJ I showed you, you've got the day list, something that updates several times per day. It's going to have fresh new music. It's kind of the opposite of Spotify's AI DJ, instead helping you discover new music. You've got things that are based on your own listening. Of course, Spotify Wrapped is a really big thing, but they also have, not just for an entire year, it'll show you songs you've been listening to, top charts ever for you, or your summer rewind. You've got things that you listen to a lot. All of that's listed at the top. You can also find playlists based on concerts that are around you. Down here, you have the ability to create a blend, and I'll talk more about that later. I think that's an awesome feature. It generates mixes based on genres you listen to, artist mixes, decade mixes. There's a lot of mixes down here, but what I really like is at the very bottom, release radar. This is a big one Spotify's been doing for a really long time. Sometimes they are just remastered stuff for copyright reasons. They publish them again, and it's not actually new stuff, but most of the time, it is new stuff. You get to discover your favorite artist's newest music without always having to read blogs and find that. Spotify also has 6 daily mixes, so just totally different genres. Spotify makes prompted playlists. You could tell it kind of like what I showed you with AI DJ, but you can just make a prompted playlist. You could say I'm having a 2006 middle school dance theme for my birthday party. Make a playlist based on that, and it'll do that. It does it surprisingly well. Spotify also has playlists that are for fans of. So it'd be for fans of Goose or whatever, and they'll have a playlist that is really just for that. And that's all the stuff that is made for you. Of course, they've got plenty of other playlists. You can find other people's playlists very easily. You can see top charts. You've got things that Spotify curates. And if you look up anything, Spotify also kind of makes playlists for you. So if I say energizing workout, you'll see energizing workout mix Spotify made for you. And if you tap on that, it's based on songs that you've listened to before that are going to be more of a workout style playlist. So that's really impressive that Spotify does that. Apple, however, has some advantages as well. They have actual radio stations with real people. They also have a made for you station. So that's going to be kind of like the daily mix essentially from Spotify. They've got different moods, so they'll say more energy type things, and you can swipe across and just kind of pick from things on the top. They've got Apple Music made for you. This one's called Get Up. You've got your Discovery station, and then over there, Keith Urban. I don't listen to Keith Urban, so I think that right there is irrelevant. Maybe Apple's pushing that. I'm not sure why that is really showing up there. But then down below, they've got kind of similar to what Spotify has as you scroll down, just like suggestions. So different playlists, different genres, different stations, different moods. And then of course, you've got like interviews down there. Another Keith Urban thing, I don't listen to him. I don't know why he's popping up here. They've got recommendations based on bands. So remember I said like fans of Goose on one thing, fans of James Gang, a band that I just was listening to yesterday. So it shows like a bunch of other things that you might like to discover there. So Apple Music definitely has a good bit of discovery, and it took a little while to really get it to be a little more curated to my style of music, but it does a pretty decent job, just nowhere near as good as Spotify in my opinion. Apple does let you use Siri to add songs to your library, which is pretty nice, but generally I think it's pretty agreeable among most people. Spotify has a superior algorithm. Like for example, like what the heck was up with this? I was making a playlist. I had 7 songs in there. They were all jam band songs. And then all of a sudden it's suggesting a Cardi B song. Nothing against Cardi B, but like that's a completely different genre. Why would it recommend that? Nonetheless, like I said, Apple is improving. That's just one of the first quirks I found. So as far as playlist mixing goes, of course, you could play any playlist in order, you could shuffle it, but there's 2 other things you could do. So on Apple Music and on Spotify, they have seamless transitions. So they call it, if you go to Apple Music, you go to settings, they call them song transitions. And same thing, if you go to Spotify, you can go to your settings, you go to playback, and they have gapless playback, as you can see right there. Now, Apple Music, you do auto mix or you can do crossfade. Same thing on Spotify, where you can say basically crossfade is like, all right, the last 5 seconds kind of fade together, and then auto mix is going to find what it thinks is the right time and make it a little bit more like a DJ kind of mix. But speaking of that, what Spotify does really well is they have this new feature called Mix. So this is basically like a full DJ mixing. It's obviously not as professional as like a DJ mixing table, but looking at this, if I just go to a playlist, I tap on Mix, it'll show me how many beats per minute every single song is. You can rearrange them easily. It shows you like 10B, 12B, 4B, so you can arrange things pretty easily like that. And if I tap on the transitions, right now it says auto for all of them, but if I tap on them, you actually have a surprising amount of controls to customize how the transition is. You can line them up any way you want. You can choose what the fade is going to be if you want it to rise, blend, wave. There's so many different things, and you have volume, EQ, and filter. Just a lot of things you could do with that. I think that's so impressive. You could save it. I'm going to discard that. I'm actually going to disable Mix on this playlist. But that's such a cool feature if you're going to host a party. Now, next chapter is going to be audio quality. This is where a lot of people say Apple Music just sounds better to me. That's what people say, which I'm not disagreeing with, but there's a couple main reasons. One, Spotify automatically normalizes volume and kind of compresses that dynamic range so all songs sound approximately the same volume. Apple Music, on the other hand, has a feature called Sound Check for audio normalization, but you can easily have that set on or off, and you end up prioritizing dynamic range. Some songs are more quiet, some are more loud, and so by default, a lot of people hear that and they think Apple Music does sound better. Spotify, though, has recently added lossless 24-bit, 44 kilohertz quality. Not the highest, but on some songs you can enable it, and it's definitely a huge step up from what they used to have. Apple, on the other hand, does have significantly higher 192 kilohertz on some songs. So Apple also has spatial audio, Spotify does not. From the audio quality perspective, I think it's without a doubt, Apple does give you more flexibility and can sound significantly better. With both of them, you can choose what the quality is going to be, like on Wi-Fi, on cellular, and when you download, so you're not using all of your data. Now, I can already hear all the people in the comments being angry, like, oh, what about YouTube Music or Tidal? I mean, yeah, I'll make comparisons about those next, but for this video, we're talking about these two to see which one's actually better. Feel free to leave more comments about which one you like, and whichever one gets the most comments, I'll make that video next. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing so you don't miss those future comparisons. But concluding audio quality, yeah, Apple Music's definitely better. I think most people listening to Bluetooth earbuds with like an SBC codec, you're just not capable of hearing that difference because of other limitations. But if you have a good setup and you're not already using downloaded files, then yeah, Apple Music does have a bit of an edge there, especially for spatial audio if that's what you like. As far as social goes, this is one thing that I really noticed after using these two apps, or really using Apple Music for the past month and Spotify for like 10 years before that. Apple Music feels a lot more alone. You feel like you're in there listening. It kind of feels like you're in a studio, just like hanging out, listening to music, picking out CDs and playing them, which is great if that's what you want. But Spotify feels more like a party with your friends, easier to discover new music. Spotify has a lot of social aspects here. They have Spotify Wrapped, which is incredibly shareable. I hate how many people share this, but I love seeing my own Spotify Wrapped, and it's so tempting to send it to your friends and see like, who was your top artist, what was your top song, and stuff like that. Spotify also has top song leaderboards for you to see which songs you've listened to the most. You can follow people. There's public and private playlists. So if I go to playlists here, if I go to my library and go to playlists, a lot of these are not even for me. Like this one, for example, I don't know who Sam Walker is, but he made a playlist that I really enjoyed. So I followed it, added it to my library. For example, now you can do collaborative playlists on Apple finally, but you've been doing this on Spotify for a while, which is great for like, you know, a friend and I want to add 5 songs per week to a playlist, and then each week we kind of discover some new music, and it's just like a book club style thing. It's fun to do, and it's something that you can do now on both platforms. That's a big positive. But Spotify goes even further. And on Spotify, they actually have something, if you go to search, then you go down to made for you, they have what's called blends. So you can see right there, made for us, you can create a new blend. So you can choose a friend, you invite them to the blend, and then this is honestly a real game changer for road trips with my wife. We both have slightly different tastes in music. There's a lot of pressure on me to just like pick the songs, and she might not like it. I don't know exactly what her preference is, but a blend is great. It takes both of our tastes, finds a lot of overlap that we both like, and then adds in 1 or 2 songs, you know, every other couple songs that maybe she likes or maybe that I like, and it just makes the overall playlist way better. And there's no like pressure to pick the right songs because you know Spotify picked these, and if you don't like them, you can skip one, and we're probably gonna like most of the same stuff in this playlist. You can also listen together with a jam, which means everyone can add to the queue. This is great for parties and road trips, and it's really a convenient feature, honestly. You have friend activity where you can literally listen to what other people are listening to in real time. If I go down, I can see what my dad is, he's listening to the Eagles right now, and 12 minutes ago at least. So I could just hit play, and everything that he plays next is gonna be playing on my phone. You can disable it, don't worry. It's not something you have to have on. It is on by default. I don't know if most people even know this, but don't worry. If you're listening to like some Hillary Duff jams, you could just disable that if you want. Nothing against Hillary Duff though. Apple Music, like I said, recently added collaborative playlists, and there's little emoji reactions as well. Kind of gives it like an iMessage feel, so a little bit more of a social aspect in there now. But otherwise, like I said, I would say Apple feels a lot more alone, like you're just in a studio picking out CDs and playing them. Whereas Spotify, you can either listen privately like that or with a lot of friends to discover new music. So for the social and music discovery reasons mentioned, Apple Music can be hard to build a library and even discover new music, even if you import from elsewhere. It plays it safe a lot with songs that it knows you're gonna like. Sometimes it completely misses and recommends things very unrelated, but I think that's where Apple Music, in my opinion, is lacking a little bit. And I don't want this to sound like I'm just like a huge fan of Spotify and not Apple Music. Like there's so many complaints about Spotify. We'll get to some in a minute. But talking about other media, podcasts are kind of a little bit of a downside and an upside for Spotify. It's mixed in. So sometimes if you're searching for things, podcasts pop up and it's like somebody uploaded a live music track, but they called it a podcast, and that kind of stuff can kind of clutter the interface, and you'll see it recommends a lot of episodes and not just music, but you see a lot of stuff there. So I kind of wish you can customize the home screen a little bit more. Apple has a separate app for podcasts. So there are no podcasts at all on Apple Music. It's just music. As far as videos go, I mean, you've got like some videos here and there, like music video type things on both the apps, but really not nearly as much on Apple. Spotify's pushing videos a lot more, trying to be sort of like YouTube. Like I think I saw a Johnny Harris video pop up there last week. I'm not really into that. I'll go to YouTube if I want to watch a video, but I do appreciate a good podcast with a video. So sometimes podcasts with videos, kind of a big positive. As far as audiobooks go, that's another thing that pops up on Spotify. If I'm looking for a podcast, sometimes an audiobook pops up and it tells me I have to pay extra to listen to it. Again, Apple Music doesn't do that. Separate app for audiobooks as well. If you go to an individual artist page, both platforms do show you upcoming concerts. So you can see, like for example, Billy Strings has an upcoming concert. On Spotify, they've got music, clips, events, and merch. So it's kind of nice. You can also find merch on here if you're interested. But if you go to events, they have a list of them. I could, it's a little tougher to do that. There we go. All upcoming events and concerts down there on Apple Music. So you can see all of them. Like I said, on both of them, find one that's near you. You can also choose your location on Spotify, and that's gonna show you what's nearby, but I'm gonna call that one a pretty even toss-up between them. As far as the mobile UI goes, in my opinion, Apple Music is much more minimal, much cleaner, a little bit less stressful, where you just find your music, It shows you, very nice, clean, minimal colors. Spotify can be a little bit cluttered. There's a lot going on here. Spotify feels kind of like a radio with tons and tons of stations, whereas Apple feels like your dad's old CD collection. You just pick one, relax, and listen to it. It's clean, less overwhelming, and certainly a lot simpler. Now, when playing a song, they both can show you lyrics. By default, they show you the album cover bigger on Spotify and lyrics bigger on Apple Music, but the lyrics are, as you can see, right below the album cover. But if I scroll down, you'll see lyrics can be an entire page. I can make that full screen, and now we see lyrics. But Apple Music has this really cool feature, as I mentioned early in the video. If you're gonna do karaoke with this, which honestly a lot of people actually do, you can tap on this little magic microphone button there on the Apple Music app. It will turn the vocals down and just have the music playing. And you can choose by swiping up and down on that how much of the vocals you want to come through. And it does a phenomenal job. I'm so impressed by how well that actually performs. Then just tap it again to disable that. They both have a home tab. They both have a search tab. On Spotify, search tab is like a full discover tab where they show you, all types of things you can go through, as I've kind of showed you throughout this video, as well as categories down there, which is interesting. You can also tap on the camera to scan either Spotify codes for artists or other friends if you want to find them more easily, finding other profiles and becoming friends. We've got a library tab on both of them, of course, which is going to be all of your stuff if I go to library on both of them. So like albums, artists, playlists, all of that's showing up there. We have a new tab here on Apple Music, which shows you a lot of new stuff, but again, it's not really catered to me. Like, I don't listen to Jay-Z at all. I don't like Jay-Z. And somehow it's all over. Jay-Z's popping up all over the top. We've got best new songs. That's kind of like charts. New this week. Again, not relevant to me until you get down to recent releases. And then these are some of the bands that I actually listen to. So that makes sense. They also have updated playlists. Nothing against like Buzz's Infinity Jams. I'm sure they're awesome, but again, not really relevant to me. All this is much less catered to me specifically. And then on Spotify, the last thing we have is the create. And here you can, like I said, create playlists, collaborative playlists, mixed playlists. All those are kind of the same thing, really. You've got blends, prompted playlists, and jams. If you wanted to make a jam, you could just start all of that from the plus button on the bottom. But a little downside on talking about things not being custom, on Spotify, if I swipe down, I really, really wish I could customize the home screen more. There's just too much stuff that I don't like. For example, audiobooks. I don't listen to audiobooks on here. I wish this would just go away. Get rid of the audiobooks thing for me personally. So I'll scroll down, it'll recommend podcasts, and there's like maybe one or two podcasts. I like the Acquired podcast, listen to that all the time. But then it'll show like the Peter Attia podcast. I listened to that one or two times months and months ago. I'm not the biggest fan of Peter Attia, and I can't remove that. I can't say don't recommend this podcast. It just always pops up there, and I think that's really annoying. Also, like I said, there's just so much going on here. You've got the recommendations on the top. I really like these. They do a great job. They've got the next episode of whatever podcast you listen to. That makes sense. And the recommendations all make sense. But there's subtle things that, like for example, across the top, you can tap on music. You can just tap on music that you're following. And it brings up things that are more relevant to you, but you kind of have to know to go up there. It's such a small button that it's really hidden in my opinion. Same thing with the DJ stuff. You can ask for some music right there, but it's a little bit more subtle, a little bit more hidden, and kind of a bit of a noisy interface. I'm not saying I don't like it, but there is just a lot going on here, whereas Apple, much, much more simple. Just you're opening this to play music. As far as the desktop interface goes, these both do have a web player from whatever browser you want, and they also, you can download these on Mac or Windows and you get the full interface. Like, it works well on there. I like how that's set up, and it's very different from the mobile app, but still very usable. Offline music varies a lot between these. Apple limits you to 100,000 songs across 10 devices. Not much of a limit, that's really high. Spotify, 10,000 songs, so significantly fewer, still probably more than I would ever download, but that's spread across 5 different devices. And as far as uploaded music goes, as I mentioned before, Spotify really sucks for this. Like, you can't really play any local files. Like, you kind of could at some point upload some files and play them on the same device, but it basically doesn't work. Apple has two things. One, they have iCloud Music Library, so it's kind of like a locker. You can upload your music and listen to it on your own devices using Apple Music. And Apple Music is also the default player for local files on Mac OS. So you can already play local files with the same music app there. As far as supported devices go, Inter-device connectivity is a big win for Spotify. You can control other devices. Like for example, if my phone is connected to a Bluetooth speaker on my laptop, then I could play, pause, skip tracks, add to the queue. I can manage all of what my phone is playing from a different device. It syncs very easily between all the devices on my account. Apple Music does not do this. Each device is pretty much independent. Also, a lot of devices have the Spotify tap feature. If you've got some Sony headphones and you double tap them or whatever, it'll fire off your Spotify playlist right away. Apple Music is already on a lot of Apple devices, so that's kind of a positive, but Spotify wins with a lot of non-Apple devices. For example, if you have a Garmin watch and you want to download music and run without your phone, well, Spotify is your option there, not Apple Music. Most smart speakers do work with both, but they generally, again, work better with Spotify. And Apple HomePods work with Apple Music really well and not really as well with Spotify unless you're doing AirPlay from another device. Spotify also integrates deeply with other things like Android Auto, Google Maps, Waze, but Apple, of course, integrates deeply with the Apple ecosystem. I don't think the ecosystem should dictate which music platform you're using, though. And switching between them, like I said, is really easy. You can import your playlist and everything from one to the other with very little effort at all. One other thing I should mention from an ethics standpoint, if you care about how much your favorite artists get paid, Apple supposedly pays 2 to 3 times more on average than Spotify. I primarily support my favorite bands by buying merch and going to their concerts, but in conclusion, there are other options too, not just Spotify and Apple Music, but I surveyed people and most people are using Spotify and a lot of people in second place are using Apple Music. YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Tidal, I'll compare those next. Leave a comment and let me know which comparison I should make. But Apple Music lets you upload your music, has spatial audio, higher resolution audio, less cluttered interface. It's more of a music purist app, and it's also cheaper. But my overall opinion, Spotify, for me, is more fun to use. The discovery algorithms are superior, the social aspect is fun and collaborative, and I've grown to like a lot of the different offerings on the app. The feature set is just far more extensive on here, and the audio quality has improved. It's still not the best, but there just aren't enough reasons for me personally to permanently switch to Apple Music. So no disrespect to Apple Music, it is a fantastic platform, but Spotify is my choice.